Hello learners, I am Dr. Sunita Dhal, faculty with the School of Gender and Development Studies IGNOU. I am also the program coordinator for the Certificate in Gender and Science program along with Professor Savita Singh. She is another coordinator of this program. Today we are going to discuss about the program, that is Certificate Program in Gender and Science. In the first session, we are going to discuss about the overview of the program of Gender and Science. Along with, we are going to reflect upon some of the key points of the first course, that is BGS 002, Gender, Science, Technology and Society. In the second half of this program, we are going to reflect upon the other two courses, that would be BGS 003 and BGS 004. And these two courses, BGS 003, which is Sociopolitical Dimensions of Gender in Science, will focus briefly on the debates, both international and Indian debates, and with different kind of policies, what has been transpired or what has been implemented in the arena of gender in science, particularly in the discourse of women in science. And the last course, that is BGS 004, which is Gender Perspectives on Health. This particular course is going to focus on the gender dimensions, how to look at health and well-being from the perspective of gender. So with this, I welcome all my learners who have registered for this program, that is Certificate Program in Gender and Science, and we are going to look at the background, how this program was conceptualized in Women in Science, and secondly, what are the central theme behind or the learning outcomes, like what is expected learning outcomes of this particular program. The background of the program, now we are talking about even National Educational Policy, NEP 2020 in India, where larger focus is also there on STEM education. So when we are talking about bringing about innovation or growth in science and technology, how do we leave women or girls at the periphery? And therefore, in when we are talking about when NEP is focusing on STEM education, this is clearly reflects on gender inclusivity, how to increase women or girls' enrollment or women's participation in science education, research and career. So with this, the current debate, we can also look at, historically what has happened and why the School of Gender and Development Studies at IGNOU thought of launching a program that is in gender and science. So when we are looking at, the conceptually, and it is very much there in self-learning materials, what are the theoretical debates historically which looked into science as an institution as patriarchal, and how modern science is based on a positivistic framework, and by making objectivity as the assessment criteria, it slowly and gradually excluded other forms of knowledge. So when we are talking about other forms of knowledge, here we are also talking about the local knowledge system or the women's knowledge system or the feminine knowledge system, when we are talking about natural resource management, or in the context of agriculture, health and healing practices, and also in let's say in millet farming, in seed saving, so on and so forth. So feminists in a way feminist scholars have offered another view of science, which is theorized at standpoint theory. And I would request my learners, you go back to the first block of this particular unit and where particular course, that is BGS 002, and there theoretical debates have been put in place in this blog, where scholars like Sandra Harding, Dorothy Smith, Donna Haraway have looked into the whole question of how science can be viewed alternatively, and how feminist science studies can actually contribute towards expanding the scientific knowledge or producing a knowledge which will be more equitable, through which we can bring about social transformation at the grassroots. In recent years also, women's access to STEM education has been debated in international platforms. So when we are talking about STEM education, that is science, technology, engineering, mathematics and medicine. And in India, feminist science studies have come up with research data to improve women's participation in science. More and more, if you really look at, women's question in IT sector or women's enrollment in science disciplines. It is gradually increasing, and India is doing far more better compared to other parts of the world, even the developed parts of the world. So with this, why we need to talk about science, gender in the context of science, that when we are talking about any innovation, there is absolutely no gender difference in terms of educating girls in science, or how to facilitate women scientists and technologists in terms of participating in research, in science career and science research. What does this program offer to our learners? So why do you need to do this program? Because this program provides a unique opportunity to research scholars, scientists, policymakers, development professionals, even the grassroots workers who are working at the block level, in different civil society organizations. They can critically engage with interdisciplinary field. The program has been designed to provide a holistic understanding of gender in science by covering basic concepts of gender, science, technology and society interface. So when we are talking about science technology, it is very much part of our society, and therefore when we are talking about society, gender is a critical component within the society, and there is dynamic interplay between gender, science, technology and society here. The core aim of this program is to understand the culture, process and practice of doing science from a gender lens. So when we are talking about science as an institution, it has its embedded structure in place, and those embedded structures are androcentric in nature, where there is a sense of male-centric approach when we are talking about scientific institutions, in terms of decision making, in terms of representation of women in scientific institutions, or at what position many women are there, or how many girls are there in science disciplines or science streams or engineering and technology field, so on and so forth. So here it is, so therefore we have to enable the structure and to be able to participate in doing science, in practicing science, and to retain more girls and women in science and other allied disciplines as well. After doing the 3 courses of this program, what is expected from our learners? So the learning outcomes are to impart theoretical concepts on gender science interface, like we have to see science as a complex institution, so also gender is a complex phenomena, and therefore how even gender studies scholars have offered a critical lens to the study of science or to the practice of doing science. Those theoretical concepts, it's very important to understand. Apart from that, there are concepts like what is gender, what is the difference between sex and gender roles, gender dynamics, gender relationship, gender power relations, gender disaggregated data, gender analysis. So these concepts have been explained in this particular course. And second is to enrich capacity of learners with regard to policies, programs and schemes to retain girls and women in science, to enable learners to critically engage with feminist science in areas of STEM, ecology, health, local knowledge systems, climate change and renewable energy technology. So where, like for example, when we are talking about local knowledge system in health and healing, or in agriculture, where we are talking about, you may be aware of seed saving techniques which have been practiced by many Adivasi and peasant communities of India. So here who are the bearers of knowledge? Primarily, if you really go to the village or in the forest areas, you could see the large number of women are participating. They are the knowledge bearers in terms of collecting, saving seeds of various indigenous crop varieties in India. And therefore, when it is science in that sense is part of the society, and therefore it is very important that how do we critically look at the science which can actually bring about social transformation at the grassroots level. And to gain basic understanding about the complex interplay between gender, science, technology and society, which I explained in my previous example, help to contextualize the discourse of science from an intersectional perspective. So here, when we are talking about intersectionality in science, certainly gender is a perspective. Along with that, we are also going to look at the question of caste, question of class, question of race, sexuality, in the context of science. So which group have been represented fairly in terms of pursuing science studies or science career, not only in India, but also in the international context. And investigate the relevance of gender concepts in order to demystify scientific rationality. So we are going to take up few of these questions, that how do we need to demystify science. The basic example I can give it to my learner is that many of you may be aware of collecting data. Remember, when we are in the field collecting a data for a survey, so here the question, let's say household survey. So the whole question is that household, when we are doing a household survey, that we assume that a man is the head of the household. It's a kind of an assumption that we take. Or if you look at some of the advertisements also, you could see that who are there in the technical sector. You could see that the male images are being posed in relation to a high-tech technology. So these are some of the some of the simple examples we can draw from our daily life, and you could see that even in the newspaper clippings or in some of the reports, you could see that how in a way gender is been taken in a neutral sense when we are talking about science. So we believe that science is gender neutral, but here the whole question, what the program will critically engage with, that science is not, there is no neutrality, gender neutrality in the institution of science, but there is a kind of gender bias that exists in the structure of scientific institutions, as well as the process of constructing a scientific knowledge. So, but certainly in India there is a change, and also this change is also there world over. So here we can go into that how 3 courses are being placed. So the first course, as I explained to you earlier, it is Gender, Science, Technology and Society. Second is Socio-Political Dimensions of Gender in Science. And third course is Gendered Perspectives on Health. So let's look at some of the key themes of the first course in this session. This particular course has total of 5 blocks and 5 segments, and within each block there are 3 units. So the first unit is Gender Society, Gender Science, Gender Technology, and second block is talking about historical perspective, positivism, evolutionism, social Darwinism, and women in modern science. And the third block is talking about health, well-being, farming, food production, environment, climate change, and energy. So what are these key points? Because we can actually revisit some of the central theme of this particular course, that how notions of femininity and masculinity shape gender roles, that as I give in an example, like, assuming household would be headed by the male, right? So it is a kind of a understanding that how gender roles are in place in the society, like in every culture. So there is a clear division of labor that is there within the family and the household. Like seen, women are more participating in the reproductive role, like taking care of the house, nurturing role, taking care of the children, elderly, cooking food. So the reproductive role, where vis-a-vis the men, where majorly they, are into the public sector in terms of earning or associating them with public sector, with technology, and then also certainly with market and decision making and taking leadership. So that this is a kind of a gender role that you could see here. And the gender power relations persist across caste, class, ethnicity and other institutions. So that is the kind of a gender power relations. So now there is a change within the household in India also. So it's a positive trend, but at the same time, can we think of restructuring or doing a role reversal within the household, like men taking care of the reproductive labor and women are taking care of entirely of the productive labor. So how do we define here? Labor means work. So can we see a complete role reversal? Or many scholars have in their concepts spoke about the restructuring of the household work or household labor. Does it happen? No, it doesn't happen. So these roles are being divided, and the same manifestation or reflection also we see when we go to the public sector or public life, in terms of like who are there in pursuing core science like physics, earth sciences, mathematics, majorly men, right? Vis-a-vis who are into other sciences or into social sciences or humanities, it is the women. So how these roles are also been clustered in various disciplines or across different streams. Knowledge production is also not gender neutral. As I explained to you earlier, that there is no gender neutrality when we are talking about science or the practice of science or doing science. It is gendered in nature. Therefore, we can, this in this course, that more of argument which looked into how the practice, culture and structure of science is gendered in nature, or there is an androcentric view of scientific knowledge production process. Other key points include how scientists and feminists have engaged with the question of gender, and technology became the agency through which gender stereotypes, attitudes have been expressed. There are multiple paradigms and worldviews within which science develops. And we were talking about the positivist paradigm. Positivist paradigm has started with Enlightenment era. So there is a clear-cut division that has been guided the development of knowledge was region, objectivity and criticality. And the difference between science, common sense knowledge, in literature, in feminist literature, the Cartesian dualism has the difference between the body and mind, public and private, productive and reproductive role, nature and culture have begun to emerge in the discourse of institutions and universities. Like Londa Schinberg states that in the history of science, the understanding of human evolution was all about the evolution of man. So this is an example. The classic example is that when we talk about evolution of society, it is all about the writings reflect the evolution of man, and it is understood that women are part here in the whole concept or notion of man. And the last two blocks, that is block 4 and 5, discusses women, science, technology, workplace, feminism and science. So what are the key points here it focuses? The gender-digital divide in the sphere of technology, which impacted the digital divides across demographies and region. There is a gender gap in access to STEM education and career, and that has been a reality. So when we are talking about there is a gender gap, let's reflect, on some of the data that in women in STEM, what are the 3 issues that the course focuses on? Women's access and participation in science, representation, re-entry and retention of women scientists and technologists, leaders in science and technology field as enablers and administrators of doing science. When we will not have women leaders in science, then how will we actually make the structure of scientific institutions, facilitating girls and women or women scientists and technologists to participate in science, right? And international context, what are the debates is the gender gap remains wide in academic careers across countries and due to attrition of women and girls at higher level. In 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development Goals (SDG) adopted by the United Nations General Assembly in 2015 calls for an inclusive and transformative society focused majorly on gender equality. So how do we achieve gender equality? Like achieving that this 2030 agenda shall ensure girls and women's access to science, education and career. So even the UNESCO report, it is a very interesting report. Learners, you can read it, like it is available online also. Cracking the Code, Girls and Women's Education in Science, Technology, Engineering and Mathematics, emphasizes that while currently more women are entering into the STEM workforce, like if you really look at information ICT, so you could see that women are there, like majority of women are there in IT sector, but they are significantly underrepresented in certain sectors also, even certain disciplines also. So the declaration and framework for action for implementation of SDG emphasized on providing attention towards girls and women to study STEM. Like, how do we educate girls and women to pursue science career? The report Cracking the Code, Girls and Women's Education, this report reflects that globally only 35% of women represent all the students enrolled for higher education in STEM, and their representation differs across STEM disciplines. So you could see that there is lower representation of women are observed in disciplines such as manufacturing, engineering, construction, natural science including mathematics, statistics, physics, earth science, so on and so forth. After having the discussion, we can conclude the session that in Indian context, the World Bank data indicates that there are more Indian female graduates in STEM disciplines compared to developed nations, and the data is there, and where you could see India has 43%, but in US it is 34, UK 38, Germany 27, France 32%. It is the data in the year 2021. AISH report data for the year 2017, 18, 19, 20 indicate that the representation of female graduates in STEM has increased during these 3 years in India. On the contrary, the representation of male graduates in STEM field has decreased from 12.9 lakh in 2017-18 to 11.9 lakh in the year 2019 and 20. So in India, the overall last decades shows that the overall enrollment for girls has increased with a declining gender gap percentage. But there is an interesting study conducted by Sahu and Clayson in the year 2021. They focused on the stream choice at higher secondary level by analyzing a cross-sectional survey data from NSS. So the aggregated data reveals that girls have higher proportion in humanities compared to boys who opted to study science disciplines. So there is also a stream choice you could see at secondary level. You could see that there is a kind of a gender gap that exists, or there is a kind of a gender segregation that exists across disciplines. The AISH report 2019-20 shows stream-wise enrollment at undergrad level, which reflects a kind of positive gender distribution in India. So even though there is higher enrollment, but at the same time when we are coming to the stream choice, we could see that there is a kind of a gender difference that exists across different disciplines or streams. With this, I would like to conclude this session, and in the next session we are going to discuss about other two courses, that is BGS 003 and BGS 004. Thank you.